timely and critical to the long-term economic health of our country. Maintaining our current high standard of living in the future depends on it. This bill is another brick in the wall, another protection in the dam wall against the sea of red ink left by Labor. So why is this bill so important? Why is it so important to take action? And how bad is this mess? After 6 years in power, Labor left Australia with a broken budget, a damaged economy and a serious mess to clean up. Labor delivered deficits totalling $191 billion. Treasury projected that without policy change the budget would be $667 billion in deficit. This would mean that we would have 16 unbroken years of deficits, the longest stretch of deficits since World War II. Labor's waste and mismanagement while in government included a cost blowout of at least $29 billion with the National Broadband Network, the disastrous Pink Bats program, which cost $2.8 billion and, most tragically, 4 lives. Days lost to strikes more than doubled. Under Labor, the number of unemployed increased by over 200,000 and the unemployment rate jumped from 4.4 to 5.7%. They broke a pre-election promise and introduced the world's biggest carbon tax. And in its first year, the carbon tax was a $7.6 billion hit to the economy. When the $900 stimulus checks were sent around, 27,000 Australians who were living overseas received them, including 21,000 deceased persons. Checks to dead people. It really is indicative of pump prime economics. The only real stimulus occurring from stimulus economics is at the ballot box, and even that is not sustained or sustainable. Labor's failed border protection policies resulted in 50,000 illegal arrivals on more than 800 boats, causing a cost blowout of more than $11 billion. Tragically, this also resulted in over 1,100 drownings at sea. Labor introduced more than 20,000 new or amended regulations, creating new red tape for business. And I remember the proud boast about how much legislation they were putting through Parliament. This place is supposed to be about putting quality legislation through Parliament, not just putting quantity through. During the 6 years Labor held government, household health costs increased 35%. Education costs increased 39%. Gas prices increased 71%. Water and sewage prices increased 79%. Electricity prices increased 101%. Investment in defence fell to 1.56% of GDP in 12-13. This was the lowest level of defence funding since 1938. The 10.5% cut was also the biggest since the Korean conflict. Under Labor, hospital waiting times for elective surgery grew from 34 to 36 days. They promised 64 GP super clinics, but only delivered 33. When they came to office, Labor inherited a surplus of $20 billion, with no net debt and $45 billion in the bank. In their 5 budgets from 2008-9 and 2012-13, Labor delivered $191 billion of budget deficits. Their deficits have reversed Australia's strong position of having no net debt. Labor effectively chaired the fastest deterioration of the Australian government's debt position in modern Australian history. This is largely because of Labor's spending problem, not because of a revenue problem. Labor increased spending sharply over its 6 budgets, including increases of 16% or $44 billion and almost 7% or $21 billion in its first 2 budgets alone. Over Labor's 5 budgets, government spending increased by over 50%, or $137 billion. Since the coalition came into power, we have worked tirelessly to fix the problems inherited from Labor. We, the coalition, believe in being an agile and nimble government. This is clearly evident in what we have achieved and the work that we have done since entering government. We are actively repairing the budget mess left by Labor and returning it to a strong and sustainable position. However, the reality is that our social services bill represents almost a third of the Commonwealth budget, and it is increasing faster than any other area of government. Without further restraint, our welfare bill is expected to grow from $149 billion in 2014-15 to $277 billion in 2025-26. It is evident from these figures that we need to restrain the growth in welfare and continue to fix the mess left by Labor. Although significant savings in social services portfolio have been secured, it is imperative that we continue with our efforts to spend our social services budget more effectively in order to reduce long-term pressures. This must be done so that we can better support those who need it most, ensuring also that Australia's social security safety net is sustainable for future generations. The government has proposed 4 measures in the Social Security Services Legislation Amendment Bill 2015 in order to achieve this. Measure 1, from 1 January 2017, this schedule will tighten proportionality requirements for pensioners. This measure reduces the amount of time a full pension is paid to pensioners absent from Australia from 26 to 6 weeks. After this period, payment will be adjusted according to the length of the pensioner's working life residence. This measure also treats all people who have spent less than 35 years of their working life in Australia the same, whether they were born in Australia or overseas. Those who have spent more than 35 years of their working age in Australia remain unaffected. This measure does not impact on the length of the portability period. The age pension and a limited number of other pensions will continue to be payable overseas indefinitely. Only the amount they receive after a 6-week absence will change. Those who have spent less than 35 years of their working life in Australia will see pensions reduced once they spent more than 6 weeks outside Australia. The amount the payment is reduced is based on the proportion of their working life spent in Australia. This measure will continue to reinforce and strengthen the residence-based nature of Australia's social security system. After a 6-week absence, payment will be adjusted according to the length of time a person has resided in Australia during their working life. The Coalition has made this change because we believe a person's retirement costs should be fairly distributed between the countries a person has spent most of their working life in. Our expectation is that where a person has spent a proportion of their working life overseas, they will be eligible to receive a pension from that country. Australia now has 30 international social security agreements around the world to support people living and working in more than one country. These agreements generally allow Australian residents to maximise their income by helping them claim payments from other countries where they have spent part of their working life. Measures 2 and 3, the government will also cease the pensioner education supplement and the education entry payment, saving Australian taxpayers around $300 million over the forward estimates. In spite of its name, the pensioner education supplement is not available to people receiving the age pension. This assists students with ongoing costs of full-time or part-time study. The most common payment type of these recipients who receive this is the parenting payment single at 43%, followed by disability support pension at 41% and carer payment at 9%. The end of September 2015, PES provided fortnightly payments to around 46,000 people. The education entry payment is a lump sum payment paid once a year to eligible recipients, removing financial barriers to education by providing financial assistance for study entry payment. In 2014-15, around 83,000 recipients received an EEP sum payment of $208. Originally, these payments were introduced to assist long-term income support recipients who had been out of the workforce for a long period of time. The payments helped recipients improve or rebuild their skills to be more competitive on the labour market. However, since the introduction of these payments, several other policies have been introduced to reduce the length of time that income support recipients, including single parents who have the capacity to work, remain out of the workforce. These policy changes include varied eligibility and participation requirements for parenting payment, as we recognise that as children age, parents' capacity to work increases. We've also made changes to the assessment and eligibility criteria for payments for people with a reduced capacity to work, requiring these people to work or look for work in line with their capacity. The Coalition has created more appropriate channels for government-funded studying and training assistance for income support recipients. These include the Higher Education Loan Program, Fee Help, Vet Fee Help, tuition loan programs, as well as through employment service providers. Ceasing these two payments will help reduce the number of payment supplements and is consistent with the recommendations of the McClure Review of Welfare. McClure's review highlighted 20 main payment types and 53 payment supplements that resulted in a complex income support system. Measure 4 will reintroduce elements of the 2014 budget savings, maintaining the income-free areas and means test thresholds for all working age allowances. Parenting payment single and student payments, including student bank limits, will also be maintained and not indexed for 3 years. Pausing indexation will allow us to realise budget savings and help slow the growth in social security expenditure. We, the government, believe that these are sensible measures that will help us to drive back to surplus. It will also allow us to continue to fix the budget mess we inherited from Labor. These changes will help achieve long-term sustainability of the payment system, while ensuring Australia has a targeted means-tested income support system that provides financial assistance for those most in need, all the while encouraging self-provision. After signing into law the Social Security Amendments of 1961, John Kennedy said, "The Social Security program plays an important part in providing for families, children and older persons in times of stress." But he added this, "But it cannot remain static. Changes in our population, our working habits and in our standards of living require constant revision." If we want to remain an agile and innovative government, we need to regularly assess the measures we make and evaluate their success. It is important that we continue to find a better way and the best way forward, learning from our predecessors' mistakes, growing from our past attempts, therefore providing the Australian people with solutions and measures that achieve long-term sustainability. It is important that we acknowledge changes that have occurred, not just within the Australian government or coalition policies, but also our working habits, living standards and population. Our world continues to become more globalised and interdependent. It is important that our policies reflect this. This bill does that by updating pension measures, removing out-of-date education-related payments and acknowledging that more appropriate channels of government-funded study assistance is available. We're able to drive the government back into surplus and clean up the economic mess that that we inherited from